The Food and Drug Administration's controversial drug regulator Vinay Prasad is set to exit the agency a second time, amid more criticisms that the FDA isn't letting promising treatments through its review. Meantime, the AI company Anthropic sues the federal government after the Trump administration labels it a supply chain risk.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the Journal's opinion pages, columnist Alicia Finley and editorial board member Kate Odell. Dr. Vinay Prasad, who has had a turbulent tenure atop the FDA's biologics division, is set to leave the agency a second time. Prasad was briefly fired last year before being brought back to the FDA by Commissioner Marty Makary. Makary is now saying that Prasad plans to leave the agency in April. Alicia, the story is that he has a leave of absence of 1 year from his old job at the University of California, San Francisco, and is now just planning to return there as scheduled. Do you buy that argument?
No, to put it briefly. There have been long-standing issues with his leadership at the FDA in charge of the biologics, vaccines, and gene therapy divisions, and he was actually pushed out last July because of some of the frustrations within the Trump administration that he was slowing or reversing prior FDA decisions on the therapies, especially gene therapies, and kind of moving the goalposts. And that it was particularly the case in a Sarepta gene therapy controversy last summer, in which he tried to pull the drug from the market, and then the FDA ended up backtracking about that. But in the intervening 6 or 7 months, there have been more gene therapies that have been rejected after the FDA moved the goalposts on what it required for approval, the study designs and such. This was getting a lot of or more attention from some members of Congress. The Senate held a hearing a couple of weeks ago on rare disease drugs and how the FDA has been scuttling them by moving the goalposts. Senator Ron Johnson has gotten involved and has been raising a lot of questions, even though he's, some people consider him very quote Maha and aligned with RFK Jr. He's also been an strong advocate for the right to try and for these rare disease drugs. And the issue here is that you want to essentially require that all these rare disease drugs run through the same kinds of large randomized trials that vaccines do, which just isn't possible for technical reasons. In many cases, like this unique cure drug that the FDA had essentially jettisoned is unethical because it would require kind of a sham surgery.
One story coming to the FDA is that advanced by Marty Makary that they are doing everything according to the regulations, and if the drug works, it will be approved. Let's listen to Makary on CNBC recently before Prasad's exit, defending Prasad.
When you have a surgeon, you want the best surgeon out there. Vinay Prasad is a genius. He's on loan from UCSF. He's published over 500 scientific peer-reviewed articles. And some of the drugs they're criticizing him for that got rejected either had stone cold normal trial results or he wasn't even involved. His center, the Biologics Center, has had a record number of approvals that it hit in December. And so we're getting stuff done. The system works. If your drug works, it's going to get approved. And if not, the public deserves to know why we're putting those decisions out there.
Different story being told, however, by patient groups and physicians. Here is Dr. Jeremy Schmaman, a Harvard Medical School neurologist and an expert in ataxia, testifying recently before the Senate.
We were all shocked when FDA denied approval of this safe drug that makes people better. I wrote 6 letters to FDA leadership between 2023 and 2025, co-signed by 17 ataxia colleagues, asking FDA to review the application again and work with Biohaven to make the drug available, if necessary, performing post-marketing studies. I never heard back. Now, 300 patients stable on troriluzole will have to come off drug, and they are distraught. I met 3 times with FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. On each occasion, they did not heed the patients or the experts or consider the science. One panel member said to me, "Why should I listen to you?"
Alicia, this gets to your point that a big part of this argument is the standard, the bar, the scientific measuring stick we are going to use with respect to, particularly to some of these rare diseases. If the FDA, if you have a physician who's saying, "Listen, my patients are stable on this drug that they've been taking," and the FDA's position is that we cannot know for sure whether it is working unless we have a placebo-controlled trial or a withdrawal study in which you're telling that doctor and other doctors like him to take some of those patients off of the drug to see what happens.
Right. And just to clarify, I mean, Dr. McCary, I don't think a single thing he said in that interview was actually accurate. The FDA has been missing all kinds of deadlines. He cited that, record approvals in December. Yes, that is 1 month, but it is the FDA under Prasad approved fewer drugs last year, novel drugs, than in recent years. A lot of approvals have reviews have grinded to a halt. There's a lot of reporting out there, including from Stat News, that he was intricately involved in many of the rejections, and that many of the staff reviewers on many of these drugs, for instance, like Capricor's Duchenne therapy, the rare disease drug for a very rare skin condition called EPP, the new Unicure drug, the Replimune melanoma drug that was rejected all the last year, that staff actually supported the approval, and he overruled that. Now, there is a long standing problem at the FDA in terms of rigidity with the staff, and in many cases, they are too rigid when they reviews these kinds of rare disease drugs, and requires kind of studies that you would require in kind of other, maybe a GLP-1 obesity or a vaccine, where the risk benefit ratio is very, very different. These rare diseases, in many cases, if they don't receive any treatment, they're going to die. So even if something that produces some kind of benefit, even if it's not 100% certain, which is essentially the standard that Prasad wants to set, there is a benefit to at least providing them access and then doing follow-up studies after the approval to see to ensure that they are actually efficacious and they're not essentially getting something, a worthless drug, which is, in Vinay Prasad's view, is actually, he's written quite extensively that he believes most drugs on the market are worthless, and actually most of his 500 some papers are actually not actually this breakthrough research about any kind of scientific discoveries. They're actually just criticizing other drugs and drug trials. So it is his long view that there should be fewer drugs on the market, even if they help many of these patients who are suffering from rare diseases or debilitating diseases. In fact, he has said that, cancer patients who have very aggressive diseases in our late stage would probably be better off just going to hospice than actually entering these trials, because few of the drugs will actually work. And this kind of paternalistic view, he thinks that they'd be better off saving their time and just going to hospice. I mean, it's a very heartless and cold view of the world, and cynical to boot. And I think it's very disappointing that Dr. McCary is defending this. And part of the issue is he hired Prasad in part because he shares this kind of worldview that, quote unquote, pharma is getting rich by selling these, quote unquote, worthless drugs. He had actually previously criticized the Sarepta's Duchenne therapy. And so even though Vinay Prasad has now gotten the boot, presumably because the White House intervened as it was hearing from members of Congress and rare disease advocates about what Prasad was doing, the concern is that some things won't change at the agency, because Dr. McCary and some others that he's brought in share the same views as Dr. Prasad.
But if so, the results will be seen in patients and in the real world. Talk a bit about that Unicure treatment for Huntington's that is being developed that you've reported on. It's a gene therapy, and there's no treatment for Huntington's disease currently. The gene therapy that is being proposed requires brain surgery, and this is a fascinating line from the company's statement in March. It says the FDA strongly recommended Unicure conduct a prospective, randomized, double-blind, sham surgery-controlled study, unquote. Alicia, I mean, again, is this kind of review that the FDA ought to be doing with a treatment like that for an awful, terrible disease like Huntington's?
Well, this is essentially a death sentence for this kind of drug because, as the unique here has pointed out, there's no way we're going to be able to enroll patients in this kind of placebo trial because they're not going to be willing to take the risk that they have a 50% risk of having to get a placebo, undergo a brain surgery, and not benefit from anything, which is essentially what Prasad has said that he wants. Now, he and McCary said, well, it's not really sham surgery. It's not really, this isn't unethical because even though they have to undergo anesthesia, they're not actually receiving a full-on treatment. And as Unique here pointed out, when they actually did a very small trial, like that was back in late 2000, like 2018 or 2019, they actually did do this kind of pinprick kind of surgery for a handful of patients with Huntington's disease. And one of the 10 actually developed a brain or a blood clot, which is a high risk whenever you undergo anesthesia and surgery. So there are risks for actually even undergoing these procedures to get a quote unquote placebo drug. And as I pointed out, that many patients, most patients, will not willingly undergo or take on these risks just to get a placebo. And I think the Vinay Prasad understands and recognizes this, and he's looking for a way just to kill this treatment because, in his view, that it won't cure all patients. It will slow their slow their progression of the disease. Though if you treat it earlier with this gene therapy, many patients actually could be cured. Earlier treatment, as with other gene therapies, is critical. But he also doesn't like the price tags that are coming on top of these gene therapies that often cost millions of dollars. And Huntington's disease afflicts about 40,000 patients in the U.S. And so in his view, is if you multiply that out by maybe $1 or $2 million, $2 million, that can be a hefty cost to the healthcare system. Never mind that actually it can save money by reducing all kinds of complications that are later caused by the disease. In any case, I think the company says that, what you're asking for is completely ridiculous or is not possible to do. And so it is said that it's now going to seek approval in the UK, in Europe, where regulators have actually come to it and asked and shown interest in this drug because the previous or all prior trials on Huntington's disease drugs haven't worked. And so the foreign countries are actually very interested in approving this drug. And the upshot would be that some Americans with the disease might actually have to travel to Europe to get it.
Kate, first question here for listeners who have maybe played with some of these AI chatbots, ChatGPT or Claude, that's the Anthropic product. Do we have a sense of what the Pentagon is using AI for and what ways it contributes to national security, as the CEO of Anthropic says there?
Well, we know that Anthropic's Claude was the first frontier AI model, cutting-edge AI model that was used on government classified networks. To frame this debate a little bit, I think it's helpful to talk about the air campaign going on in Iran right now that the United States is doing. There's some press reports that the U.S. is still using Anthropic Claude products in that campaign. And now, while we don't know exactly how it's being used, one thing we really do know is that what AI is good at is, for one thing that it can do, is look at a huge amount of information and fuse that information really rapidly and help humans make decisions about what they're seeing. And so that's one really important military application of AI. And again, let's connect that a little bit to the air campaign in Iran, because the United States has hit 5,000 targets in its air campaign. That is much faster so far than the Desert Storm action in 1991. And so it looks quite plausible that AI is helping us, for instance, select targets, fuse a lot of information to narrow those down into lists of targets. Now, I know people are unsettled by the use of AI, the potential use of AI in military settings, but it really has the potential to reduce human error by sorting through all this information. But it also has the potential to really help the United States. I mean, finding these targets, it's not just a matter of being efficient. One thing we've been talking about here on the podcast is how basically in Iran right now, we need to find and to destroy Iran's ballistic missile capability faster than they can launch missiles, so that we don't just run low on all of our missile defense. And so AI has really big potential in not just making our military more efficient, but that really matters at a strategic level of us being able to find targets. And if we were ever in a larger conflict in the Pacific, for instance, where there would be tens of thousands of targets by comparison, the best artificial intelligence products could really be a difference maker. And so I say all that because I think it's important framing behind this public brawl that the Pentagon and Anthropic have been having for several weeks now.
So what is the dispute between the government and Anthropic? It seems like it has to do with some objections, limitations that Anthropic wanted to put on the use of its technology.
Yes. So the Pentagon wants to be able to use advanced AI for what they term all lawful purposes. And this is important. I mean, the Pentagon has a point that when you contract with a missile maker or somebody who sells you an airplane, they give you that missile or that plane, and then the government decides how to use it, and so they don't put restrictions on what you can do with it or what targets you can hit with it. And so the Pentagon has a profound interest in making sure that the military use of these systems is in the hands of politically accountable and elected officials, and that outside companies don't get to dictate how it's used. So I think the Pentagon has a point there. But what Anthropic objects to is it does not want its models used in, one, what it calls the mass surveillance of American citizens, and two, in fully autonomous weapons systems. Now, this turned into a big mushroom cloud with the president, kicking Anthropic out of the entire federal government contracts. But I would note here that the two parties they're closer than they initially appear, because first, okay, mass surveillance, the Pentagon is not doing that. That's not why the Pentagon wants the software. Surely they can come to some sort of arrangement on that. Fully autonomous weapons also may someday be more of a concern, but AI models are not prepared to power those weapons, and those the technology on the weapons side is also still, I think, premature there. So you have kind of Anthropic has this worldview about AI and its potential risks, and it wants those risks accounted for in the contract. And the Pentagon wants the prerogative for the government to make those decisions and not outsource them to technology companies. So I do think there are good points here on both sides, but both parties should have been able to find a negotiated solution. And instead, what happened was the president, before the deadline that had been put out to come to an agreement, posted online that Anthropic was going to be out of here. All of its federal contracts were gone. And then the Pentagon followed up by labeling the company a supply chain risk, as if it were, Huawei, the Chinese telecom firm, a sleeper risk in your systems. And again, if the Pentagon decides it doesn't want to do business with Anthropic because it can't come to a contract agreement, that's one thing. It is an entirely another thing to use this supply chain risk designation that the federal government has to basically punish a advanced AI company for not meeting the terms of your contract agreement. And so while that supply chain risk, it seems to be more narrow than was feared. It's not, you don't have to rip Anthropic's products out of all of its, subcontractors. It is just punitive, and it's a show of government force, when the real interest here is for both parties to come to an agreement that allows U.S. forces to continue using this technology that seems to be quite embedded into our combatant commands and has just tremendous potential, including in offensive cyber warfare, which we saw how important that was in Venezuela when we used that as part of our ability to get in to do that raid. And so it's just regrettable that it's turned into this mess when I think there's both an interest in finding a reasonable solution and an ability to do so.
In the wake of this dust up over Anthropic, OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, came up with a deal to serve the Pentagon on these classified systems. Kate, there is something to be said for competition, but open competition. I mean, perhaps there is a reason that these combatant commands and whatnot liked the Claude, the Anthropic product, and we're not using the OpenAI product. People who have used many of these models in their own lives know that they excel at some tasks and others are better at other tasks. And so the open competition, I think, is a strength of the U.S. system. And we'll give you the last word, but maybe the challenge here is trying to stay ahead of China. It's not clear to me why it serves the U.S. interest in that race to be hamstringing Anthropic, which is a pretty strong competitor so far.
Yes, my last word of hopefulness here would be that right before the deadline and President Trump's, announcement of exile for Anthropic, members of Congress, a bipartisan complement of members of Congress, the four who manage defense policy, which on the Republican side is Mitch McConnell and Senator Roger Wicker, they started in a letter, started raising their hands up saying, hey, can we find a solution to this problem? Can we get off the ledge here and negotiate an agreement? And Congress could work on this issue in a defense policy bill and try to come up with, a legal framework that works for everyone. Because again, Congress also agrees we don't want fully autonomous AI weapons yet without a human making those final decisions, and we have no interest in mass surveilling the American people. And so that would be, I think, that at this point is the best off ramp. And I hope the Pentagon drops the supply chain risk because, to your point, about competition, I'm concerned that now we are showing that there are business risks to doing work with the Pentagon, and that if you get into a bad contract dispute with them, not only might they end that contract, but they might go after you. And that is not good for getting some of our best technology companies to work with the Pentagon. But again, Congress, I think, really could help weigh in here. And I think the fact that OpenAI was able to come to an agreement with the Pentagon suggests to me that it's not really about these differences. It's there's some talking past each other and some personality at play that is preventing a deal more than a substantive disagreement about policy. And so I think, given that it seems that these products are helping our U.S. service members in their most important military actions, I'm still hopeful that there can be a way back from this ledge and a way to negotiate a solution.
Thank you, Kate and Alicia. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.